Yesterday, there had been nothing here, only salt, stone, and dead soil. Now, Haru Arase stood before a forest that should have needed 100 million years to exist. Trunks, wider than houses, rose into luminous mist. Silver water moved between their roots. Warm rain carried the smell of bark, wet leaves, and ripe fruit. Green text opened across his vision. Time acceleration complete. Elapsed time, 10,000 years. New species detected, 317. Original organisms lost, 94%. Haru had planted wheat, beans, potatoes, algae, and one seed his mother had left him. The wheat was gone. A golden fruit rolled from the ferns and touched his boot. The system identified it as a sunfruit. Its rare minerals could correct the collapse spreading through his sister's body. His communicator vibrated. Yui Arase, natural nutrient source required within 24 hours. Haru lifted the fruit. The ground moved. Every tree bent toward the northern ridge. Leaves folded. Insects vanished into bark. The silver stream stopped. Dominant organism detected. Threat class undefined. Between two roots, an enormous eye opened and fixed on Haru. Pulse of the Age had awakened minutes before midnight and triggered an immediate initialization cycle. The gate had reopened with 3 minutes left before the first scheduled nightly pulse. If Haru remained inside when the countdown ended, 10,000 years would pass through his body in moments. Haru tightened his fingers around the sunfruit and drew the rusted sickle that had belonged to his father. The eye rose. Soil poured from a skull made of braided roots. A forelimb struck the ground, and the impact threw Haru against a tree. Pain flashed along his ribs. The fruit slipped from his hand. The creature lunged for it. Haru understood at once. It had not come for him. It had come for the concentrated nutrients in the fruit. He kicked the sunfruit toward the silver stream and ran in the opposite direction. The root beast changed course, plowing through ferns. Haru cut a hanging vine as he passed. Clear sap sprayed across the creature's face. A swarm of blue insects poured from nearby flowers and buried their stingers in the wet sap. The beast roared and smashed its head against the trees. Haru reached the fruit first. He caught it, rolled beneath a root, and sprinted toward the exit door glowing at the edge of the acre. 30 seconds remained. The root beast tore free of the insects. It crossed half the valley in 3 bounds. Haru reached the door and slapped his palm against the hearthstone beside it. The door opened into the concrete storage room beneath his apartment block. The creature's jaws closed around his coat. Haru twisted out of it, fell backward through the doorway, and struck the emergency seal. The root beast pulled. Cloth ripped. The door narrowed to a line of green light and vanished. Haru lay on the floor in his undershirt, clutching the fruit to his chest. At midnight, something heavy hit the other side of a door that no longer existed. The storage room trembled. Then the second acceleration began. Yui ate 3 slices of the sunfruit under the supervision of a municipal clinic machine. The fruit did not replace her normal food. Its rare mineral compounds corrected the acute deficiency that synthetic meals could not treat. Color returned to her face within an hour. The gray shadows beneath her eyes faded, and her hands stopped shaking when she lifted a cup. Haru sat beside the bed and watched the nutrient monitor climb. He had imagined relief would loosen the pressure in his chest. Instead, he kept thinking about the warning that 94% of his original organisms had vanished. One fruit had saved Yui. He did not know whether a second fruit still existed. Yui noticed the torn sleeve hanging from his pack. She asked what had happened. Haru told her that the new acre had rough ground and that he had fallen. She studied the bruising along his ribs and did not believe him. She also knew that pushing would make him retreat behind a calm expression, so she touched the back of his hand and asked him to bring her next time the acre was safe. He promised too quickly. The next morning, Haru opened the door to his acre from an abandoned service tunnel beneath the clinic. The forest was gone. Black grass covered rolling hills. The giant trees had collapsed and become ridges of dark soil. Their descendants were low, twisted shrubs with mirror-like leaves. A dry basin marked the place where the silver stream had flowed. The system recorded another 10,000 years. 200 species had disappeared. 90 new ones had emerged. No sunfruit tree remained. Haru found the root beast descendants first. They had become long, pale animals that moved beneath the soil and rose only to breathe. The massive creature from the previous night had been one brief form in a lineage already changed beyond recognition. He spent 4 hours searching for fruit. He found only hard pods that released corrosive dust when cut. At the public seed market, Haru tried to sell a sample of black grass to buy more medical food. The licensed merchants laughed at him. The plant had no registered origin, and its roots carried genetic markers no database recognized. A girl in a white research jacket stopped at his table. Her silver-blue hair was tied high behind her head. She held one blade of black grass under a portable scanner, then checked the result twice. The plant's genome contained layers of mutation that should have required thousands of generations. She asked where he had found it. Haru said it came from his acre. She asked how long his acre had existed. 2 days. The girl put the grass down carefully. She introduced herself as Mio Tsukihara, an apprentice analyst assigned to the 7th Node Agricultural Laboratory. Her personal acre possessed an ability called Archive of Species. She could trace the evolutionary history of living tissue. According to her scan, Haru's grass descended from at least 900 distinct ancestral populations. Haru packed his sample away. Mio stepped in front of him. She had no interest in reporting him to a corporation. She said if she wanted to expose him, she could do it with the scan already stored on her device. What she wanted was to see the acre. Haru refused. Mio looked at the clinic bracelet on his wrist, then at the remaining grass samples he had been trying to sell for almost nothing. She guessed that someone he cared about needed food. She said an unknown ecosystem could poison a patient as easily as it could feed one. That stopped him. He invited her under 3 conditions. She would carry no transmitter. She would take no sample without permission. Mio accepted before he finished speaking. Inside the acre, she knelt in the black grass and pressed both hands to the soil. Pale diagrams opened around her fingers. For several minutes, she said nothing. Several genomes did not descend from anything Haru had planted. Mio traced them to sealed recovery templates inside the Heartstone. Every personal acre carried a small genetic archive and a folded reserve of water and minerals, but ordinary owners could unlock only basic microbes after improving their soil. Pulse of the Age had treated Haru's zero life index as an emergency simulation and opened deeper templates during the first cycle. The insects, burrowing animals, and silver stream had come from that dormant restoration system, then changed through 10,000 years. Then she told Haru that his farm was not growing quickly. It was aging. The distinction mattered. A crop accelerator pushed a plant toward maturity. Haru's ability allowed entire populations to reproduce, compete, mutate, and die through 10,000 years. Anything he planted might become useful, dangerous, or extinct. Haru asked how to keep the sunfruit alive. Mio answered that he could not preserve a single crop for 10,000 years by treating it like a crop. He needed an ecosystem that gave the tree reasons to survive. Pollinators, soil builders, competitors that prevented one species from exhausting everything. Predators that kept herbivores under control. Water that returned instead of draining away. He had been trying to grow food when the real task was to build a world. Haru and Mio began with organisms people usually tried to kill. They bought bacterial cultures from waste processors. They collected lichen from the shaded side of old concrete. Mio traded 3 weeks of laboratory wages for a sealed colony of mineral-eating fungus. Haru found insect eggs in the ventilation garden above the clinic and carried them to his acre in a plastic tube warmed against his skin. His old friend Toma Inui supplied the first machine. Toma was short, broad-shouldered, and permanently marked with grease. He had met Haru 2 years earlier when both of them reached for the same water pump in a salvage yard. Instead of fighting over it, they had spent 6 hours repairing it and then discovered that neither had a use for it. alone. When Haru asked for a system that could survive 10,000 years, Toma assumed it was a joke. Then he saw the black grass and stopped smiling. Plastic would break down. Any pump with moving parts would become dust long before the first century ended. Toma built a stone basin with ceramic channels and gravity gates. Nothing in it needed to move once the water started. They installed it before sunset. Mio arranged the starter species by elevation. Bacteria went into the damp basin. Lichen covered the rocks. Fungus entered the deeper soil. Moss took the shaded slopes. Haru planted hardy reeds near the water and scattered seed from drought-resistant weeds across the upper ground. He kept his mother's ancient seed in a sealed pocket. They were not ready to risk another one. At midnight, the acre closed. The next morning, the basin had become a lake. Rain fell from a low green sky. Moss formed a thick carpet over half the acre. Reed forests rose from shallow water, and pale insects moved in clouds above them. Haru smiled until Mio showed him the western ridge. A wall of gray fungus advanced across the moss. It digested every living thing in its path and converted it into a hard mineral crust. In another few centuries, it would probably consume the entire acre. They had 37 minutes before the fungus reached the lake. Haru wanted to burn it. Mio stopped him. Fire might kill the surface growth, but the underground network already covered too much ground. They needed to make the fungus spend more energy than it gained. They searched the new species. The blue insects fed on moss nectar. A blind burrowing larva fed on the insects. Nothing ate the fungus. Mio's archive revealed that the fungus had evolved from the mineral-eating culture they introduced. It had lost the ability to process iron because iron was scarce in the acre. When exposed to iron, its outer cells sealed themselves into useless shells. Toma had used iron pins to hold the ceramic channels during construction. Haru tore them out one by one, cutting his palms on the stone. He drove the pins into the ground ahead of the fungal wall. The effect spread less than a meter around each pin, far too little to stop the advancing wall. Haru remembered the metallic dust in the service tunnel outside the acre. It came from corroded train rails. He ran out, filled 2 maintenance bags, and returned. Mio mixed the dust with lake water, while Haru widened the highest ceramic channel. They released the mixture down the slope. Red water spread across the moss. Where it touched the gray fungus, the surface hardened. The living network tried to redirect around the iron. Haru opened side channels, forcing the water into new paths. Each time the fungus changed direction, he changed the flow. For 20 minutes, they fought an organism that had learned to avoid poison over thousands of years. It sent thin underground strands beneath the hardened zones. Mio tracked them with archive. Haru cut trenches and flooded them before the strands reached the lake. The fungus finally withdrew toward the dry ridge. Haru expected Mio to tell him to destroy the survivors. Instead, she marked a boundary and said they should leave them. The fungus had almost ruined the acre, but it also turned dead stone into minerals other species could use. Eliminating it completely would remove one of the processes building soil. Haru looked across the wet moss and understood why farming this acre would never become simple. Every useful species could become a disaster. Every disaster might still be useful. Before they left, the system presented a new function. Chrono anchor available. Capacity, 1 target. A chrono anchor could protect one organism, structure, or genetic line from complete extinction during the next acceleration. Haru chose the ceramic water system. Mio argued that the lake bacteria were more valuable. Haru chose the channels anyway. If the water system disappeared, every other species would depend on luck. The next morning proved him half right. The channels survived. The bacteria did not. The lake had turned clear and lifeless. Mio sealed samples of the clear water and mineral crust and took Haru to the 7th Node laboratory. Her mentor, Dr. Seijin Kuramori, was a thin man with uncombed gray hair, round glasses, and a brown coat that smelled faintly of bitter synthetic coffee. He examined the layered mutations and confirmed that the soil had experienced thousands of biological generations, Kuromori did not ask Haru to surrender the acre. He warned him that a large harvest could still represent a dying system. A stable farm needed several paths for water, nutrients, and reproduction. If every useful process depended on one species or one structure, the next cycle would eventually remove it. He agreed to advise them under laboratory confidentiality. From that day onward, Mio sent him sealed records after every major ecological shift, and Kuromori helped them distinguish a productive ecosystem from one that was merely consuming its final reserves. Yui's condition improved after the sunfruit, but the clinic could not reproduce its mineral profile. The effect would last several months, perhaps less. Haru needed a renewable source before her body began failing again. He opened the small metal case that had belonged to his mother. 7 seeds rested in separate glass tubes. Each was dark brown, ridged like folded bark, and larger than his thumbnail. The labels had faded years ago. Ayame Arase had worked in a municipal seed bank before dust fever killed her. She had told Haru only that the seeds came from a tree people once believed extinct. He had used one on the first night. The sunfruit had descended from it. 6 remained. Mio wanted to test the shell of one seed without germinating it. Haru allowed her to shave off a fragment smaller than a grain of sand. Archive revealed an engineered genome. The tree had been designed before the collapse to exchange genes rapidly with related plants. It adapted by absorbing pollen and viral material from its environment. That explained why its descendant had changed so quickly. It also meant the seed could become almost anything. They prepared the acre for 4 days. Toma expanded the stone channels and built raised platforms from fired clay. Mio restored bacterial diversity using cultures from several waste systems. Haru introduced 3 species of flowering weeds to support insects. They added small lizards to control the insects and seed-eating rodents to spread plant life. Kaito Homuro arrived while they were carrying the lizard crates. Haru had met him that morning at the registration office for licensed acre owners. Kaito was 19, tall, and impossible to ignore. His red hair rose like flame, and his open white jacket exposed forearms wrapped in black heat-resistant bands. His acre ability, Volcanic Heart, generated mineral-rich ash and controlled heat. He had ranked first in every local production test. Kaito had watched Haru register a life index that jumped from 0 to 400 and then dropped to 80 in a single day. He assumed Haru had falsified the reading. He followed them to demand a private trial. Haru declined. Kaito interpreted that as fear and refused to leave the public gate. To move the argument away from the crowded corridor, Haru issued him a 10-minute guest permission. Kaito entered behind the lizard crates before Haru could finish explaining the acre's hazards. The argument ended when one of the lizard crates broke. The released animals disappeared into the moss. A larger creature struck from the reeds. It resembled a centipede with the jaws of a fish. It had evolved since the previous morning by feeding on every moving animal near the lake. Kaito raised one hand. Heat gathered around his palm. Mio warned him that fire would ignite the methane trapped under the moss. He fired anyway. The centipede recoiled. Blue flame raced across the ground. Haru tackled Kaito into the lake as the moss erupted. The blast shattered 2 ceramic channels and threw burning soil into the reeds. The centipede escaped beneath the water. Kaito surfaced furious, but the anger faded when he saw the fire spreading toward the western ridge. The gray fungus released clouds of spores in response to the heat. Haru ordered Kaito to lower the temperature along the fire's edge. Kaito said his ability created heat, not cold. Haru pointed at the lake and told him to heat the deep water instead. The rising warm water would pull cooler water from below and create a circulating current. Kaito understood. He plunged both hands into the lake and released controlled heat. Toma rebuilt a broken channel with wet clay, while Mio guided Haru through the spore clouds. Haru cut strips of murali from the shrubs and laid them across the burning moss. The leaves reflected heat and released a bitter oil that slowed combustion. The fire reached the fungus. The mineral crust cracked. Gray growth surged toward the heat. feeding on the dead moss exposed beneath it. Haru used the fungus as a firebreak. He opened a channel and sent iron-rich water behind it, preventing the organism from spreading farther once it consumed the burning zone. By sunset, the fire was out. Kaito stood in the mud and stared at the acre he had nearly destroyed. He did not apologize elegantly. He admitted that he had been wrong and asked what he could contribute. Haru pointed at the broken channels. Kaito spent the next 6 hours firing clay pipes under Toma's supervision. That night, they planted the second seed. Haru placed the chrono anchor on its genetic line. 10,000 years later, the tree still lived. It covered the central hill in a network of pale trunks joined beneath the soil. Hundreds of fruits hung from the branches. Most were toxic. Some exploded when touched. One variety contained the same stable nutrient pattern as the original sunfruit. They had found Yui's medicine. They had also created a forest that drank nearly all the water in the acre. To sell sunfruit legally, Haru needed a production license. The qualification trial took place inside a neutral test acre owned by the 7th Node Council. Contestants had 6 hours to restore a damaged field while defending its hearthstone from simulated pests. The highest-ranking owners received market access, water credits, and one rare system item. Kaito entered to prove he still deserved first place. Haru entered because the clinic would not accept unlicensed food more than once. The trial field had been poisoned with salt. Automated burrowers moved beneath the soil and attacked irrigation lines. A transparent barrier divided the acreage into individual sections, but contestants could spend points to open temporary gates and trade resources. Kaito used volcanic heart to melt the upper crust and raise mineral-rich soil from below. His section became fertile within an hour. Then the burrowers attacked. He heated the ground until the machines retreated. Haru had no useful combat ability outside his own acre. Pulse of the Age could not operate on neutral land. He started with a shovel, 3 liters of water, and a box of unknown seeds. He tasted the soil, spat it out, and dug shallow trenches across the wind. Instead of pouring water onto the seeds, he used it to wash salt into the trenches. He traded half his seeds to another contestant for a bag of charcoal, crushed it, and mixed it into the planting rows to hold moisture. The burrowers cut their roots. Haru noticed that the machines attacked the wettest points. He buried damp cloth in empty rows and moved the real seedlings into drier soil. The burrowers followed the false targets. A desperate contestant from the lower residential blocks tried to steal his remaining water. Haru opened a trade gate and allowed the man to enter. Then he showed him that both sections would fail unless they diverted salt together. The man hesitated, saw his own seedlings dying, and accepted. By the 4th hour, 6 sections had joined Haru's drainage pattern. Kaito remained alone. His soil produced fast growth, but repeated heating had dried it. The simulated pests adapted by attacking from deeper layers where his heat weakened. A warning announced the final phase. The central test field would flood with brine. Contestants could protect only what their channels could drain. Kaito looked at Haru's network and asked for a gate. Haru opened it. They had 12 minutes. Kaito heated a line through the barrier foundations, cracking the stone and creating a slope. Toma was not allowed inside, so Haru had to direct the work from memory. He used the contestants' shovels to connect every drainage trench. Mio watched from the public platform and sent no advice. Outside help would disqualify him. The brine arrived in a waist-high wave. Kaito's heat turned the front edge to steam, but the pressure kept coming. Haru ordered everyone to abandon the crops nearest the inlet and reinforce the final rows. Several contestants refused to sacrifice their best plants. Their sections flooded, and the water spilled over the barriers toward Haru's network. Haru climbed onto a gate mechanism and cut its support cable with his father's sickle. The gate fell flat, forming a temporary dam. Brine struck it hard enough to bend the frame. Kaito braced the metal with a strip of volcanic glass drawn from the soil. Haru redirected the overflow into the salt trenches. Charcoal beds filtered part of it. The rest drained through Kaito's cracked foundation and into an empty lower section. When the 6 hours ended, Haru's field contained fewer plants than Kaito's, but every surviving row had healthy roots. 11 contestants had preserved crops by joining his drainage system. The council ranked Haru first for system stability, and Kaito first for raw production. Kaito demanded a single winner. The examiner told him that a farm feeding one person perfectly had failed the purpose of the trial. Haru received a transparent stone called a growth lens. It could reveal changes in soil and energy flow. Kaito received additional water rights. Outside the arena, a man in a black coat waited beneath the dead branches of a municipal tree. A white streak ran through his long hair. Golden grain patterns covered his sleeves. His right hand bore dark cracks that moved beneath the skin. Reiga Kurosaki congratulated Haru. He led the largest agricultural guild in the region, Black Harvest. His members controlled more than 1,000 linked acres and nearly half the legal food supply in 7th Node. Reiga had seen Haru's life index. He knew it had changed again during the trial, even though Haru's acre was closed. He offered medicine for Yui, permanent water access, and protection from every guild in exchange for one thing. Haru would sign his acre's heartstone into Black Harvest custody. Haru declined. Reiga's expression remained pleasant. He said the offer would stay open until hunger made the decision easier. The Sunfruit Forest lasted 11 nights. Each morning brought a different version of it. Some trees became low bushes. Others developed hollow trunks filled with warm water. Fruit changed color, shape, and toxicity. Mio used Archive to identify the safe line, and Haru protected it with the single chrono anchor. The rest of the acre became unstable. The anchored tree line could not disappear, so every competing species evolved around it. Burrowing animals gnawed at its roots. Fungi learned to imitate its chemical signals. Insects used its branches to reproduce in numbers the lizards could not control. The root beasts returned as well. At first, Haru saw only tunnels. Then entire slopes began shifting at night. The growth lens revealed that the Sunfruit Forest and the underground animals had become parts of one energy network. The trees fed sugar into the soil. The beasts protected the roots. The roots drew water from every other region. The system had created a dominant organism larger than any single creature. Mio named it the Root Leviathan. On the 12th morning, the lake was empty. The western fungus was extinct. The moss had become a thin yellow skin over dry earth. Every useful species outside the Sunfruit network was dying. The Leviathan's eye opened beneath the central hill. Haru could harvest enough fruit to keep Yui healthy for years. If he did, the acre would collapse into a single monstrous lineage. If he destroyed the network, he might lose the only medicine that worked. He tried a controlled separation first. Toma built ceramic blades that could be lowered through the soil by gravity. Kaito heated the ground in narrow lines, forcing roots toward the blades. Mio mapped the shared chemical signals. Haru planned to cut one sunfruit grove away from the Leviathan and preserve it with the anchor. The Leviathan reacted before the first blade reached full depth. The central hill split open. A body of roots, bone, and compacted soil rose from beneath the forest. It had 6 limbs shaped from entire tree trunks. Fruit glowed between armored plates along its back. Its mouth opened into a tunnel lined with grinding stones. It struck the nearest ceramic blade and shattered it. Kaito attacked the right forelimb with concentrated heat. Steam exploded from the wet wood. The Leviathan drove the burning limb into the ground and smothered the flame with soil. Then it released spores from vents along its spine. Mio shouted for everyone to cover their faces. The spores carried chemical commands. Nearby insects turned toward the humans. Clouds of stinging bodies filled the air. Toma activated clay smoke pots filled with mirror leaf oil. Bitter vapor broke the insect scent trail, but the Leviathan used the distraction to crush the main water channel. Haru watched the silver flow vanish into the creature's roots. Direct attacks were feeding it. Every cut exposed living tissue that rooted into the soil. Every burst of heat released minerals it could absorb. He ordered Kaito to stop fighting the body. Kaito saw a tree trunk swinging toward Haru and ignored the order. He blocked it with a wall of volcanic glass. The impact drove him to one knee. Cracks spread through the glass. Haru ran beneath the raised limb and used the growth lens against the Leviathan's underside. Energy lines converged from every part of the acre into 3 swollen root nodes near the central hill. The nodes were not hearts, they were exchange points. The Leviathan survived because thousands of organisms shared food through them. Haru could not kill the creature faster than it repaired itself. He could make the network stop cooperating. He told Mio to find the old gray fungus in the evolutionary record. Archive could not resurrect a species, but Moku did not yet exist to store memories. Mio searched the living samples for descendants of the old gray fungus. She found dormant cells inside the mineral crust beneath the western ridge. Toma dug them out while Kaito held the Leviathan's attention. The fight became a chase across collapsing ground. Kaito struck the creature's eyes with brief flashes, never heeding one place long enough to feed it. The Leviathan learned the pattern and began closing its eyes before each attack. Kaito changed rhythm, letting the heat gather in his hands without releasing it. When the creature flinched early, he slid beneath its jaw and burned the sensory roots along its throat. The Leviathan slammed him into the mud. Haru reached Kaito before the grinding mouth closed. He hooked the sickle through the back of Kaito's jacket and dragged him clear. One stone tooth caught Haru's shoulder and tore a deep line through muscle. His left arm weakened at once. Mio pressed a sealing patch over the wound and told him the fungal sample was ready. The gray fungus reacted to iron by forming inert shells. During the early crisis, they had used iron to contain it. Now, Haru wanted the opposite. He wanted the fungus to spread through the nutrient-rich root network. They mixed the spores with sunfruit sap and lake water. The Leviathan recognized the sap as food. Haru needed to inject the mixture into all 3 exchange nodes before the creature understood the threat. The first node lay beneath the central grove. Toma opened a collapsed irrigation channel, while Kaito lured the Leviathan uphill. Haru crawled through the pipe with one working arm, broke the clay wall beside the node, and poured in the spores. The network pulled the liquid inward. The second node was exposed beneath the creature's left hind limb. Mio released a swarm of pollinating insects, marked with sunfruit scent. They covered the Leviathan's eyes. Kaito heated the soil under its opposite side. The creature shifted its weight, and Haru drove a ceramic tube into the node. Its roots sealed around the third node and began producing iron-rich resin. The fungus hardened wherever it touched the protective layer. Haru's own containment method had become the creature's defense. The Leviathan charged the acre door. If it destroyed the hardstone beside the entrance, the entire pocket space could collapse. Tama tried to reinforce the door. A root caught him around the waist and lifted him from the ground. Haru had one chance to expose the final node. He removed the chrono anchor from the sunfruit line. Mio saw the system light disappear from the trees. She understood what he intended and warned him that the medicine could vanish during the next acceleration. Haru touched the anchor to the old water channels instead. Then he cut the largest sunfruit trunk. The Leviathan recoiled, as if the sickle had entered its spine. Every root tightened to protect the trees. The limb holding Toma dropped. The iron resin flowed away from the third node and toward the wounded trunk. Kaito shattered the exposed shell with a concentrated thermal pulse. Haru emptied the remaining fungal mixture into the opening. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the root Leviathan began fighting itself. The fungus spread through the exchange network, consuming sugar and releasing signals that imitated starting roots. Each section demanded more food. Trees pulled energy from the beasts. Beasts tore nutrients from the trees. Repair systems activated everywhere at once. The Leviathan turned in circles, crushing its own groves. Fruit fell and burst beneath its weight. Root limbs tore free from the central body to protect separate colonies. Haru opened every water gate. The anchored channels survived the creature's earlier attack. Water flooded the exposed network, carrying fungus into smaller roots. The Leviathan's movements slowed. Its body separated into competing pieces. Kaito wanted to burn the remains. Haru stopped him. The dead network contained most of the acre's nutrients. Fire would waste them. They withdrew before midnight. The next morning, a new forest covered the acre. It was lower, wetter, and filled with hundreds of plant species. The root leviathan was gone. Its decomposed body had become dark soil, several meters deep. One sunfruit sapling stood beside the restored lake. It had survived without the anchor. The system raised Haru's acre to the rank of living world. Far away, inside the largest linked domain in 7th node, Reiga Kurosaki watched the ranking change. He placed one cracked hand on his heartstone and ordered Black Harvest to prepare acquisition contracts. Reiga did not begin with soldiers. He began with water. 2 days after Haru's acre received the rank of living world, the municipal allocation to his apartment block was reduced by 40%. The clinic informed him that Yui's treatment account had been flagged for review. Merchants who had agreed to purchase sunfruit stopped answering messages. Every decision carried a legal stamp. None mentioned Black Harvest. Mio traced the pattern through public records. The water contractor owed money to a Black Harvest holding company. 2 members of the clinic board leased their acres to Reiga. The merchants depended on his transport gates. Haru could expose the connections, but an investigation would take months. Yui's water ration would run out in 8 days. Reiga invited Haru to dinner in a greenhouse built inside his linked domain. It was the first place Haru had seen where real grass grew for decoration. Fruit trees stood in clean rows beneath artificial sunlight. Black Harvest workers moved quietly between them, each wearing a metal band connected to an acre contract. Reiga served fresh rice. He explained that disorder had destroyed the old food systems. Every owner protected a tiny piece of land, repeated the same mistakes, and hoarded anything that worked. Black Harvest solved that problem by placing many acres under one plan. The workers received food and security. Reiga received authority over their heartstones. He offered Haru a senior position. Yui would receive permanent treatment. Toma would receive a workshop. Mio could direct a research division. Kaito would command field security. Haru asked what happened when a worker disagreed with the plan. Reiga said that a starving society could not afford private experiments. At a nearby table, a woman spilled water. She froze before the cup hit the floor. The metal band on her wrist tightened and flashed red. A portion of her acre's energy transferred into the domain as a penalty. Reiga continued eating. Haru slid the contract back across the table. Reiga warned him that refusing would not make him independent. It would only leave him exposed to people less patient than Black Harvest. Haru answered that patience did not turn ownership into consent. The greenhouse doors opened behind him. Sena Kurenai stood there in light armor patterned with poisonous flowers. Her shoulder-length violet hair framed a face that gave away nothing. She served as Reiga's field commander and managed contract enforcement. Sena escorted Haru out. At the domain gate, she told him that Reiga had once saved her settlement during a famine. He had arrived with food when every council meeting produced another argument. People survived because one person had taken control. Haru asked how many of those people could leave now. Sena did not answer. That night, Haru gathered Mio, Toma, and Kaito inside his acre. Yui joined through a clinic call. They could not fight Black Harvest alone. Haru proposed a cooperative where each owner kept control of their heartstone while trading what their land produced best. Kaito disliked the word cooperative. Toma disliked the amount of construction it implied. Mio disliked the lack of safety rules. Yui said the name should be Sprout, because every grand forest began with something small enough to crush between 2 fingers. They accepted the name. Their first problem arrived before sunrise. 3 independent acre owners had heard that Haru could restore soil. They came asking for help. One had water, but no nutrients. One produced medicinal insects that ate every crop she planted. The third owned a cold acre where seeds remained dormant. Haru could not solve all 3 by giving them sunfruit. He had to make their abilities work together. Sprout began with 4 members and 3 frightened strangers standing outside the door. By the end of the week, it had 17 acres. Sprout's link system was crude. Toma built transport boxes from metallic fiberwood grown in his iron forest acre. Kaito fired ceramic seals for water containers. Mio inspected every organism before transfer. Haru supplied soil cultures and resilient seed lines from his accelerated ecosystem. The owner with the cold acre, an elderly woman from the eastern shelter, stored dormant seeds for everyone. The insect breeder moved her larvae into Haru's forest, where evolved lizards controlled their numbers. The water owner filled Toma's gravity tanks and received mineral ash from Kaito in return. No one surrendered a heartstone. The arrangement produced less food than Reiga's centralized domain during the first month. It also survived 3 failures that would have ruined a single farm. When Kaito's ash carried too much sulfur, Mio identified the contamination before it reached every member. When the cold acre lost power, the water owner used stored heat from ceramic blocks fired in Kaito's land. When Haru's newest grain evolved barbed roots that attacked other plants, the insect breeder discovered that her larvae ate the root tips. Each weakness had somewhere else to go. Reiga responded by purchasing the market licenses of 2 Sprout members. Their legal transport gates closed overnight. He offered to reopen them if the owners signed black harvest contracts. Haru brought their food through his own licensed gate, but his monthly transfer limit was too low. Toma proposed hiding produce inside equipment shipments. Mio rejected the idea because one inspection would cost them every license. Kaito suggested challenging Black Harvest to a territorial match. System law allowed registered guilds to compete for transport rights. The match would take place on a contested acre. Each side had to establish a functioning supply route while environmental hazards tried to destroy it. The winner would receive 6 months of unrestricted local transport. Sprout was not registered as a guild. Haru filed the papers that afternoon. The match began inside a neutral quarry domain assembled by the council from 40 abandoned acres. Its unstable cliffs, connected tunnels, and acidic rain created a route several kilometers long without belonging to any contestant. Black Harvest fielded 20 trained owners under Senna's command. Their abilities had been selected for construction, defense, and extraction. Sprout fielded Haru, Mio, Toma, Kaito, and 12 volunteers whose properties had never been considered useful in combat. The objective stone stood 2 kilometers from each entrance. Teams had to carry 10 sealed food crates to it. Any crate exposed to rain became contaminated. Senna's group advanced in formation beneath a roof grown from overlapping shield plants. Earth owners leveled the ground. Wind owners pushed acid clouds aside. Every movement followed a rehearsed plan. Sprout's first cart broke after 400 meters. The acidic rain weakened a wooden axle that Toma had tested only in clean water. One crate slid into a ditch. Kaito covered it with volcanic glass, but the glass trapped acid around the seal and began dissolving the metal clasp. Haru ordered the team to abandon the cart. Toma protested that they could repair it. Haru pointed to the cliff above them. Acid had eaten through the stone layers, and the entire wall was beginning to lean. They moved the crates by hand, seconds before the cliff collapsed. The landslide blocked the direct path. Senna's team passed on higher ground. She could have attacked Sprout's exposed line, but she conserved resources and kept moving. Reiga wanted an undeniable victory, not a chaotic fight. Haru used the growth lens on the fallen stone. Acid flowed through cracks into a dry tunnel below. The tunnel reached toward the objective, but toxic vapor filled it. One Sprout member owned an acre that produced absorbent white reeds. They had little food value and no market demand. Haru packed the reeds into Toma's damaged cart frame and turned it into a rolling filter. Kaito heated the air behind the team, creating a slow draft through the reeds. They entered the tunnel. The method worked until the reeds became saturated. Mio's eyes watered as Archive tracked the chemical load. They had enough filter material for another 300 meters. The tunnel extended twice that far. Toma cut the metallic fiber ropes from the crates and wove them through the reed bundles. The fibers reacted with acid, forming a brittle salt. It bought them another 100 meters. Then the tunnel ceiling opened. Senna's poison vines dropped through the crack and wrapped around the lead crate. She had predicted they would use the tunnel and sent roots through the ground ahead of them. Kaito burned the first vine. 3 more tightened. Their sap released a sedative mist. Haru told everyone to stop attacking. The vines were designed to resist struggling prey. Pressure made them release more branches. Haru opened one food crate and took out a bag of evolved grain. He scattered it over the roots. Nothing happened. Senna's voice came through the crack above. She said Black Harvest had analyzed his common seed lines. Haru had expected that. The grain was bait for the burrowing larvae hidden inside the bag. They woke in the tunnel's warmth and chewed toward the strongest plant scent. The vines convulsed. Kaito cut them free with a narrow line of heat before they could adapt. Sprout reached the objective through a drainage opening beneath the hill. Senna's team arrived from above with all 10 crates intact. Sprout had 9. The abandoned crate at the broken cart would cost them the match. Toma looked back toward the tunnel. Haru calculated the distance and the remaining time. Kaito volunteered to retrieve it. The cliff had collapsed again, blocking the route. He could melt through, but the heat would contaminate the crate. The elderly owner of the cold acre stepped forward. She had joined the team only to store emergency seed. Her ability could not create ice, but it could draw heat into her soil and hold it. Haru asked whether she could target Kaito through a linked system channel. She had never tried. Mio connected their heart signatures under Sprout's temporary guild permissions. Kaito ran back into the tunnel. He melted a narrow shaft through the fallen rock, while the cold owner pulled heat from his body and the surrounding air. Frost formed across her hands. Kaito's skin reddened, then paled as the thermal strain reversed. He reached the crate with 4 minutes left. The return path began collapsing behind him. He pushed the sealed box ahead on a wave of softened stone. The cold owner shook so hard that Mio had to hold her upright. Kaito burst from the drainage opening with 11 seconds remaining. Both teams placed 10 crates on the objective. The system measured route stability. Black Harvest's path relied on 5 specialized abilities, controlled through Senna's command structure. Sprout's route had changed 3 times and remained usable by owners with several different properties. Sprout won by 2 points. The transport rights opened at midnight. By morning, 43 independent owners had applied to join. Haru's acre changed faster as its life index rose. The system did not increase the 10,000-year interval, but complex organisms adapted more efficiently. Forests developed memory through chemical signals. Predator populations adjusted to harvesting patterns. Some plants opened their fruit only when Haru's footsteps approached. Mio warned that the ecosystem was beginning to recognize him as a recurring environmental force. On the 87th acceleration, every tree turned toward the door before he entered. A childlike figure sat on the hearthstone. It was scarcely 60 centimeters tall. Its body looked carved from pale, flexible wood. Green leaves formed its hair, and its eyes shone like golden seeds. Thin roots curled around its bare feet. Kaito reached for heat. The creature copied the motion. A ring of flowers opened around Kaito's boots and released sparks of stored sunlight. Mio scanned it. Archive returned fragments from thousands of species. Tree, fungus, insect colony, root beast, lizard, moss, and organisms that had left no living descendants. The growth lens showed a bright root running from Moku's chest into the hearthstone. The system identified the structure as a living interface of Pulse of the Age. It carried memory between accelerated ecosystems and Haru's acre. Mio warned that damage to the root could injure both Moku and the ability itself. The creature called itself Moku. It spoke slowly at first, as though choosing words from many mouths. It remembered rain falling on forests that had vanished 30 nights earlier. It remembered being eaten, burning, spreading spores, drowning, and growing toward light. Every major lineage on the acre had contributed to the network that formed its mind. Haru asked whether Moku controlled the forest. Moku answered that control was a word humans used when they did not understand how many agreements kept a living thing alive. Then it showed Haru the dead. Roots touched his wrists. The acre disappeared from his sight. He experienced 1,000 compressed memories. A bird lineage starved after Haru redirected the lake. Burrowing animals suffocated in iron water. A flowering plant lost its pollinator because he removed a dangerous insect nest. Whole forests rose around the anchored sunfruit and died when he cut it free from the Leviathan. The memories lasted seconds. Haru fell to his knees and vomited into the moss. Moku did not accuse him of murder. It asked whether the next useful harvest would justify another world built to be discarded by morning. Haru had treated the accelerated years as empty distance between experiments. For the Acre, those years contained complete lives. Mio knelt beside him. She reminded him that refusing to act also shaped the ecosystem. The original Acre had been dead. Every living lineage inside it existed because he had introduced the first organisms. Responsibility did not mean preserving everything. It meant understanding that choices had costs. Moku agreed to help under one condition. Haru would stop measuring success only by what he could remove from the Acre. They created 3 protected wilderness zones where no harvesting was allowed. Haru reduced daily extraction. Mio began recording extinct lineages through Moku's memory. Toma designed gates that let Haru enter without disturbing nesting grounds. The system awarded Haru 2 additional chrono anchors. He placed one on Moku and kept the other unassigned for emergencies. The original anchor remained on the water channels. Haru did not anchor the sunfruit. The trees survived for 6 more nights, changed into a vine for 3, disappeared for 1, and returned from dormant seeds beside the lake. Mio built a reserve outside the Acre, so Yui's treatment would no longer depend on a single morning. For the first time, Haru believed they might stay ahead of the crisis. That was when Black Harvest attacked Sprout's members at home. Senna chose targets carefully. She did not invade Haru's Acre first. She struck the water owner, the cold seed vault, and Toma's iron forest. If those 3 lands fell, Sprout would lose transport containers, stored seed, and irrigation in one night. Black Harvest held legal invasion tokens obtained through debt claims purchased from old municipal contracts. The tokens allowed Senna's teams to open hostile gates for 1 hour. Haru received 3 emergency signals at once. He could defend only 1 acre personally. Toma told him to protect the seed vault. Water could be replaced, and the iron forest had defenses. The elderly owner had no combat experience, and most of Sprout's future crops existed in her cold soil. Haru sent Kaito to the water acre, and Mio to Toma's land. He entered the seed vault, with Moku hidden inside a transport pack. The cold acre was a flat white plain under a dim sky. Thousands of seed containers rested beneath transparent ice. Senna stood near the Heartstone with 6 Black Harvest owners. Purple vines spread from a portable garden at her feet. She offered the elderly owner a contract. Black Harvest would preserve every seed. In exchange, the Heartstone would belong to Rega. The woman refused. Senna released the vines. Haru cut the first tendril, and black sap sprayed across his glove. The material began eating through the fabric. He tore the glove off and buried it in snow. The vines did not attack people directly. They entered the ice and sought warm pockets around dormant seeds. Each root released enzymes that broke storage shells. If Haru used heat, he would wake the seeds and ruin the vault. If he flooded the roots, Senna's toxins would spread everywhere. Moku touched the ice and listened through fungal traces in the old soil. It located several living mats of white reeds near the eastern boundary. The plants had been grown before the match in the quarry and stored in deep dormancy with their roots intact. They could begin absorbing acid or poison as soon as they were warmed, but the owner could not heat the entire vault without waking thousands of other specimens. Haru asked her to draw cold away from one narrow channel beneath the ice. She placed both hands on the Heartstone. A dark line appeared under the white surface as the temperature rose by a few degrees. Haru and Moku broke the ice above the stored mats. They dragged the stiff roots into the warm channel and pressed them against the path of Senna's vines. Moku released chemical signals copied from the sunfruit forest. The toxin roots hesitated, turning toward the false food signal. The reeds woke slowly. Pale shoots unfolded while their roots absorbed the first black sap. Violet stains spread through the white tissue. but the poison stopped moving toward the seed containers. Sena adjusted her portable garden. The next toxin carried an oily compound that the reeds could not bind. Purple roots pushed through the weakening mat and entered the warm channel. Haru used the growth lens to follow heat under the ice. The owner shifted the narrow strip ahead of the attack, forcing Sena's roots to chase the only warm path. Each change bought Haru enough time to pull another dormant mat into position, but the stored reeds were running out, and the toxic oil kept passing through them. Moku searched its collected memories and found a bacterial lineage from Haru's old lake that could break apart a similar compound. The lineage was absent from the active ecosystem, but Moku carried dormant spores in cavities beneath its bark. It pressed one finger into the last living reed mat and released them. The bacteria woke inside the warmed roots. At first, the mat darkened and began to collapse. Then bubbles formed around the oily poison. The bacteria split the compound into smaller molecules, and the reeds absorbed what remained. White roots thickened around Sena's vines and drew the toxin out of the storage soil. Sena increased the flow. The cold owner widened the warm channel by less than a handspan, sweating while frost formed on her eyelashes. The reed mat spread far enough to surround the portable roots. Toxic pressure rose inside Sena's garden and began traveling back toward her heart connection. Sena cut the portable garden free before the contaminated flow could enter her own acre. Her attack stopped. A message arrived from Kaito. The water acre was safe, though half its reservoir had boiled during the fight. No message came from Toma or Mio. Haru left the seed vault to its owner and opened an emergency sprout gate into the iron forest. He arrived beneath a rain of burning metal leaves. Toma's acre had become a battlefield of ironwood towers. Black Harvest attackers used vibration abilities to shatter the metallic fibers. Every impact sent razor-sharp leaves through the air. Toma had raised movable walls from young trees, but the walls became heavier each time they absorbed metal from the soil. Mio crouched behind one, with blood running from a cut above her eye. She was using Archive to predict where the next vibration would travel through the root network. Toma had trapped 4 attackers by growing ironwood around their feet. A 5th stood at the heartstone, forcing a contract spike into its surface. Haru ran toward him. The ground rang like a struck bell. A vibration wave threw Haru backward. Moku rooted itself into the soil and caught his arm before he hit a line of metal thorns. The attacker at the heartstone turned. A black mask hid his face, but Haru recognized the cracked pattern across his right glove. Reiga had entered the battle himself. The field commander at the seed vault had been a distraction. Reiga's ability, Devourer of Fertility, pulled energy through the contract spike. Ironwood around the heartstone grayed and collapsed into powder. Toma tried to grow a barrier, but every new root fed Reiga more material. Haru had brought no sunfruit weapon, no evolved predator, and no environmental control from his own acre. He had the sickle, the growth lens, one spare anchor, and Moku. Mio shouted that Reiga's absorption followed the strongest energy gradient. He was not consuming everything equally. He created a low energy zone around himself, and resources flowed toward it. Haru cut open one of Toma's transport boxes. Inside were ceramic seals fired by Kaito, white toxin reeds, and packets of mineral ash. He scattered ash in a ring around the heartstone. Reiga absorbed it. The ash vanished into the dark cracks along his hand. Haru scattered more. Mio understood and helped tear open the remaining packets. Volcanic ash held enormous mineral concentration. Reiga's ability pulled it faster than the ironwood. For a moment, the heartstone stopped draining. Reiga looked at Haru with mild disappointment. Then, he reversed the flow. The absorbed ash erupted from the ground beneath them. A wall of jagged mineral threw Haru and Mio apart. Reiga seized Moku by the throat. The small wooden body twisted. Roots struck Reiga's arm, but every contact drained color from them. Haru lunged with a sickle. Reiga caught the blade in his bare left hand. Blood ran between his fingers. He did not release it. He said Haru still thought in terms of solving one immediate imbalance. Reiga had built a system where every resource, attack, and mistake became his property. Moku's chest split under his cracked fingers. Inside lay a glowing root fragment connected to Haru's Pulse of the Age. It had formed when Moku emerged from the memory network. Reiga tore it free. The chrono root screamed through Haru's heart link. Haru collapsed. For a moment he felt 10,000 years trying to move through his bones. Mio drove a white reed spike into Reiga's wounded hand. The reed absorbed the blood and the energy around it, swelling into a violet knot. Toma used the opening. He dropped every ironwood tower at once. The forest folded inward. Reiga could absorb living energy, but the falling trunks carried physical mass, built over weeks. He withdrew his contract spike and opened an exit gate before the towers crushed the Heartstone. Black Harvest escaped with him. The invasion tokens expired. Moku survived, but the wooden plates across its chest remained split. It could no longer access large parts of the Acre's evolutionary memory. Worse, Reiga now possessed a fragment of Pulse of the Age. Mio examined the residue on the Heartstone. The invasion log had classified Moku as a portable living organism, and the bright root as a detachable biological resource. An invasion token allowed captured biological resources to leave with the attacker, even though it could not transfer a Heartstone. The system had failed to recognize that this particular root was also part of Haru's ability, and it would not reverse a completed transfer without a recorded contract violation. The stolen root could not reproduce Haru's exact ability. It lacked the balance of his living ecosystem and the direct link to his Acre. Reiga would need to graft it into his own devourer of fertility. Haru imagined 10,000 years of evolution inside a domain built to consume neighboring land. They returned to his Acre and found the sky red. The next acceleration had begun 6 hours early. Reiga activated the stolen chrono root before Sprout could reach his domain. Black Harvest's linked acres aged unevenly. Some passed through a century. Others endured hundreds of thousands of years in minutes. Contracted owners were expelled from their lands as forests burst through gates and died in the corridors of 7th Node. The evolved organisms shared one trait. They consumed heart energy from neighboring acres. Reiga's ability had shaped every generation toward parasitism. He sealed his central domain and blamed Haru's unstable power. Public broadcasts showed red skies above Sproutlands and the wounded owners carried from Toma's iron forest. Fear spread faster than facts. Then the 7th Node food reserve failed. A Black Harvest storage acre had accelerated past the edible stage. Grain became woody grass. Livestock became armored predators. 3 years of centralized reserves vanished in one activation. The council announced that 20 million residents had food for 48 hours. Haru had enough sunfruit reserve for several thousand people. His acre could perhaps produce more, but one night yielded unpredictable results. The current forest had lost most edible fruit after the early acceleration. Pulse of the Age showed signs of instability, where the chrono root had been torn away. Mio calculated that they would need 100 consecutive accelerations to search for a high-yield ecosystem, perhaps more. Each activation required resetting species, water, soil, and anchors. They had never attempted more than one in a day. The council offered access to emergency energy if Haru opened his acre to public monitoring. Terra Zero authorized a disaster override that could trigger repeated controlled cycles instead of waiting for midnight, although every activation would add to the same global energy debt. Reiga's accusation had made secrecy impossible. If Haru refused, the council would seize Sprout's stored food under disaster law. Haru agreed to the broadcast. Millions watched as he entered the acre. He did not make a speech. He showed the damaged forest, the dry sunfruit vines, and the red fractures around the Heartstone. He explained that 10,000 years did not promise a harvest. It promised change. Then the work began. Toma installed external collection gates so harvested food could leave before the next activation. Kaito built ceramic barriers around the Heartstone. Mio organized a public analysis team, but kept final control of species decisions. Moku, still wounded, chose which memory spores could restore lost functions. The first acceleration produced a swamp of toxic bulbs. The second dried the acre into red dunes. The third filled it with tall grass rich in protein, but covered in glass needles. Haru harvested samples and reset the water channels. He anchored the grass lineage, hoping to remove the needles through competition rather than direct breeding. The fourth acceleration created grazing insects that could digest the glass. The fifth produced birds that ate the insects and spread the grass seed. The sixth brought a fungal disease that killed both. 6 failures, 60,000 years. The public feed filled with anger. Commentators accused Haru of wasting the node's remaining energy. Yui watched from the clinic and sent him a private message. She reminded him that his first sunfruit had existed for 1 morning. It still mattered. Haru changed the plan. They had been searching for one perfect crop. Rega's disaster had already shown where that led. Instead, they would build several food chains and harvest different parts before any one lineage dominated. Mio divided the acre into climate zones using Toma's ceramic walls. Kaito controlled heat during setup. Moku restored wetland bacteria in one zone and drought moss in another. Haru introduced the glassgrass, sunfruit vines, edible lake algae, mineral fungus, and small burrowing grazers. Acceleration 7 produced balance for 4,000 years and collapse after 6,000. The growth lens showed why. The burrowers connected the zones underground and carried disease between them. They did not remove the animals. Toma buried porous clay barriers that allowed water and microbes through while blocking larger bodies. Acceleration 8 maintained 3 zones. The sunfruit vine disappeared. Haru used the spare anchor on its dormant seed bank, not the adult plants. Acceleration 9 restored the vine, but the algae covered the lake and removed oxygen. Kaito created deep temperature layers before the next cycle. Cold lower water held more oxygen. Warm upper currents prevented complete stagnation. Acceleration 10 produced edible fish, descended from the old blind larva. Their bones accumulated dangerous metals. Mio traced the metals to the mineral fungus. Moku remembered a reed lineage that stored those minerals in removable seed heads. They introduced it at the lake edge. By acceleration 14, the acre produced 5 safe foods. The yield was too low. They increased harvest pressure before each cycle, removing the largest individuals, so evolution favored rapid reproduction. The method worked for 3 accelerations, then produced species that hid food underground or released toxins when approached. Haru reduced direct harvesting and introduced non-human grazers, whose waste could be collected. The ecosystem responded less defensively. At acceleration 23, a storm erased 2 zones. At 31, the root leviathan lineage returned in miniature and chewed through the barriers. At 48, Moku collapsed from memory overload. Haru stopped the process for 6 hours, even as the food reserve entered its final day. Moku's existing anchor protected its core, but the new living wood graft across its chest could still be rejected during the next age. Haru moved the anchor from the water channels to the graft for 1 cycle so the tissue could fuse without disappearing. The channels aged and cracked during acceleration 49. Toma had expected the risk. He replaced them with channels grown from ironwood roots trained around ceramic cores. When the ceramic failed, the living structure preserved the shape. At acceleration 62, the acre reached a stable pattern. Sunfruit vines climbed low ironwood frames. Glassgrass grew beneath them. Burrowing grazers fed on the roots and fertilized mineral fungus beds. Lake algae fed small fish. White reeds removed toxins. Predatory lizards kept every population moving. Haru harvested only the surplus identified by the growth lens. The first shipment fed 50,000 people. They needed far more. Sprout members linked their acres voluntarily. Kaito provided heat. The cold vault stored harvested seed. Water owners supplied reservoirs. Insect farms carried pollen. Hundreds of farms sent algae, cellulose, immature crops, organic waste, and mineral feedstock through the collection gates. Pulse of the age did not create matter. Haru's acre reorganized that incoming mass through living food chains and returned a larger share of it in forms people could digest safely. By acceleration 100, one night of outside time had contained 1,000,000 years of guided evolution. Food moved through the public gates in a continuous stream. Sunfruit paste, algae cakes, grain flour, mineral mushrooms, and fish protein filled emergency kitchens across 7th Node. The new food did not replace every missing reserve. It stretched the remaining municipal stores long enough for independent farms to restore normal production. The node survived. Reiga's accusation collapsed under the live record. Contracted black harvest owners began breaking their bans and applying to Sprout. Then, the sky above every personal acre turned red. Terra Zero spoke through every heartstone on Earth. Critical temporal debt. Planetary core failure in 365 days. The broadcast showed a map of billions of acres. Red fractures spread between them like cracks across glass. Haru looked at the food leaving his gate. He had saved the city by spending time the world did not possess. Almost 2 years had passed since the morning Haru carried the first sunfruit out of his acre. The warning changed daily life within an hour. Some owners emptied their acres and refused to enter again. Others harvested everything they could, stripping soil that might not exist in a year. Black markets sold false devices that promised to erase temporal debt. Religious groups gathered around heartstones and waited for Terra Zero to speak again. Sprout's membership passed 10,000 acres, then nearly broke apart under the weight of fear. Haru asked Terra Zero to remove Pulse of the Age from him. The Central Intelligence answered through his heartstone. Destroying the ability would stop future debt from his acre, but it would not repair energy already taken. The stolen chrono root was now fused with Reiga's domain. As long as it remained active, temporal fractures would continue spreading. Terra Zero placed Haru's acre under planetary quarantine. The automatic midnight cycle was suspended. Pulse of the Age could activate only through a specific emergency authorization, and every approved use would be recorded against the remaining core energy. Haru asked why the system did not revoke Reiga's access. Terra Zero explained that Project Terra had been designed after governments repeatedly seized food systems in the name of emergencies. The Central Intelligence could enforce contracts and prevent direct theft of heartstones, but it could not remove an owner's property because an algorithm predicted future harm. Reiga's members had signed legal control agreements. Until the system recorded a violation of those agreements, his domain remained protected. The answer disgusted Haru, but he understood the trap. A system powerful enough to save everyone by force would also possess the power Reiga wanted. Black Harvest reopened its gates 3 days later. Reiga offered shelter from the coming collapse. Any owner who joined his central domain would receive food, water, and a protected place in the last surviving network. He claimed the global system could no longer support billions of separate experiments. One domain had to inherit the remaining energy. Hundreds of thousands accepted. They were not fools. Red storms had destroyed crops across the region. Sprout could share resources, but it could not promise safety. Reiga's domain produced regular food again because it drained exhausted acres and converted them into controlled fields. Haru visited a lower shelter where half the residents intended to sign. A father showed him 2 hungry children and asked whether freedom could fill their bowls that night. Haru had brought grain, but not enough for everyone. The man signed Black Harvest's contract before Haru left. Kaito wanted to challenge Reiga directly. Haru refused. A territorial match would risk the heartstones of every Sprout member, and Reiga's domain now contained more raw power than any guild on Earth. Mio spent weeks studying the red fractures. They were not random damage. Every personal acre existed as a folded pocket attached to the planetary core. Pulse of the Age drew energy along those attachments to simulate time. Reiga's graft pulled from many connections at once, widening them until entire acres began leaking into one another. During a red storm, Haru opened his gate and found a piece of someone else's ocean hanging above his forest. Salt water fell from the sky for 9 minutes. Fish with transparent bones rained into the sunfruit vines. Then the fracture closed and took a section of Haru's lake with it. Moku touched the wet ground and said the acres were beginning to forget where one world ended and another began. The countdown reached 300 days. Terra Zero refused routine activation requests under the quarantine. Haru received permission only when a regional crop failure threatened immediate deaths. Food production dropped, and criticism returned. Sprout members argued that saving the core meant little if people starved before it failed. Yui entered the meeting hall, carrying a small cake made from grass flour. It was her 16th birthday. At the exact minute of her birth, green light formed around her wrist. A new door appeared in the wall. Yui's acre was quieter than Haru's. It contained the same dead soil every owner received. But thin lines of light ran beneath the surface. Each line pulsed in response to the people standing near her door. The system named her property Resonance. She could create voluntary links between heartstones. Linked owners retained complete control of their acres while sharing selected resources, sensory data, and system functions. Sprout had already built temporary guild channels, but those connections depended on transport gates and council permissions. Resonance joined the acres at their foundations. The ability had strict conditions. Every owner had to consent. Any participant could withdraw. Yui could not take resources, redirect abilities, or conceal what passed through the network. The more owners joined, the more physical strain she carried through her own heartstone. Haru immediately rejected the idea of using it against Reiga. Yui listened while he explained the risk. If temporal fractures traveled through the link, her acre might become the point where every failure converged. She had only just recovered enough to live normally. Her body still carried damage from years of mineral collapse. When he finished, she walked to the center of the dead acre and knelt. She placed both hands on the glowing lines. Haru's heartstone responded from another space. A green thread formed between them. Yui felt his forest, lake, wilderness zones, and the red wound left by the stolen chrono root. Haru felt the empty shape of her land, waiting for connections. She released the link and stood carefully. Her hands trembled from the effort. She told Haru that he had spent years making decisions for her because he was afraid she would die. The sunfruit had saved her, but it had also become another reason for him to decide what dangers she was allowed to face. She would not surrender her acre to Reiga. She would not surrender it to her brother either. Haru looked toward Mio for support. Mio folded her arms and told him Yui was right. They began with 5 connections. Haru shared soil organisms. Kaito shared heat. The cold vault shared stored seed data. Toma shared structural patterns. A water owner shared a measured stream. Yui's dead acre responded. Moisture gathered beneath the surface. Warmth moved through one line, cooled in another, and returned as condensation. Bacteria entered the soil without passing through a physical gate. Grass appeared around the heartstone. The network did not increase the total resources. It prevented them from remaining trapped where they were useless. 10 links became 100. 100 became 10,000. Each new owner saw every transfer clearly. When a farm requested water, the network showed how much it had, how much it needed, and what it could return. Owners voted on large exchanges. Small automatic balances followed limits they chose themselves. Food production stabilized across Sprout. The strain on Yui did not remain small. She slept beside her heartstone and woke with green lines visible under her skin. Dr. Kuramori ordered rest. Yui reduced the number of direct connections by allowing local clusters to elect temporary relay acres. The solution: spread responsibility. It also made the network harder to destroy. Reiga responded by expanding Black Harvest's domain around Sprout territory. Contracted acres merged into a dark continent, visible through every member's gate. Rivers flowed toward one central tower. Fields grew in exact squares. Forests were cut into identical strips. The domain produced food efficiently. It also left drained acres behind it. When an owner's land could no longer contribute, Reiga folded its remaining space into the central territory. The original Heartstone became a dim marker in the road. People inside received rations. They could no longer open personal doors or leave without permission. Sena continued enforcing the contracts. She saw more owners asked to withdraw, as red storms worsened. The agreements allowed withdrawal after repayment of food and protection costs. Rega raised those costs each week. No one could pay. When Senna questioned him, Rega showed her the planetary countdown. He said, choice belonged to stable times. Survival required a structure that could not change its mind. Then he gave her a sealed order for the final day. If the core approached failure, every contracted heartstone would be consumed to protect the central domain. The agreement owners had signed allowed energy penalties. It did not allow death. For the first time since Rega saved her settlement, Senna understood that his idea of protection no longer included the people he controlled. Senna contacted Haru through an old invasion token. She offered evidence of Rega's final order and a route into the central domain. In return, she asked Sprout to extract the contracted owners before Rega realized she had turned against him. Kaito assumed it was a trap. Toma pointed out that a real trap would probably look less obvious. Mio analyzed the order's system signature and confirmed it came from Rega's Heartstone. Haru accepted the meeting. They entered Black Harvest through an abandoned acre, already drained to stone. Senna waited beside its dark heart marker. She had removed her command armor. Poison burns covered both arms where Rega had severed her access to the central garden. She explained that the domain's core stood beneath the tower. The stolen chrono root had grown around it, feeding on thousands of contracted connections. If they removed it carelessly, those connections would collapse and kill the owners attached to them. Yui would need to transfer each Heartstone into resonance before Haru cut the root. Rega knew this. He had begun moving loyal guards toward the relay points. Kaito and Toma would open physical routes for trapped owners. Yui would connect through the drained acre. Mio and Haru would follow Senna to the root chamber and map the graft. The first stage succeeded too easily. Yui found the contracted hearts and sent consent requests. Thousands accepted at once. Green threads appeared through the dark ground. Then, the poison entered resonance. Rega had built parasitic organisms into every contract band. When an owner tried to transfer, the organism followed the new connection and released a signal that forced linked land to surrender nutrients. Sprout acres began losing water and soil energy. Yui collapsed beside her Heartstone. Mio entered the network through archive. She could see the parasite's evolutionary code moving from acre to acre. It changed every time Sprout blocked one pathway. Haru ordered the transfer stopped. Yui refused to close the connection while owners remained inside Black Harvest. Her voice weakened, but her hands stayed on the Heartstone. Mio found a temporary solution. The parasites recognized contract energy, not people. If one connected owner accepted the entire signal load, the others could pass through cleanly. Mio rejected it. Pulse of the Age would accelerate the parasite's adaptation. It could become impossible to remove within one night. She redirected the load into Archive of Species. Her acre had almost no living ecosystem. It was a library of preserved genetic patterns, which gave the parasite little to consume. Mio planned to trap it inside empty soil and analyze it. The first wave crossed safely. The second adapted to feed on stored genetic information. Mio screamed and fell against the root chamber wall. Violet lines spread from her fingers to her neck. Archive windows around her filled with corrupted species histories. The parasite was eating the records she had spent years collecting and using them to design new forms. Haru reached for the connection. Mio struck his hand away. If Pulse of the Age touched it, the infection would evolve faster. Sina opened cuts along her poisoned arms and pressed them against Mio's wrists. Her garden of toxins could draw biological compounds into her own blood. But this parasite was partly system energy. The transfer slowed, then reversed, and began poisoning Senna as well. Haru used the growth lens. The infection followed whichever network contained the greatest variety. Mio's archive attracted it because it held millions of patterns. Senna's body attracted only the biological layer. Moku opened the split plates of its chest. It carried memories from millions of years on Haru's acre. More variety than archive. It offered itself as bait. Haru refused. Moku reminded him of their agreement. The Acre was not a factory, and Moku was not his tool. It could choose what risks to take. Moku connected to archive. The parasite surged into his wooden body. Leaves blackened. Golden eyes dimmed. As it entered, Moku released false memory paths. The infection chased entire evolutionary histories that ended in dead mineral crust, iron water, toxic fruit, and extinct root networks. Mio recovered enough control to isolate each branch. She locked the parasite into a loop of useless adaptation. Senna then extracted the biological shell, and Haru severed the system connection with his sickle. The remaining owners transferred into resonance. Moku fell still. Haru carried it out of the root chamber, while Toma's evacuation bridges collapsed behind them. Kaito held off Black Harvest guards in a central field, using narrow heat barriers that forced pursuit into safe corridors rather than burning contracted land. They escaped with more than 60,000 owners. Reiga retained hundreds of thousands. Moku survived because of the anchor fixed to its core, but most of its leaves fell. It would need months to rebuild its memory network. Mio's archive lost nearly a third of its records. That night, she sat beside Haru's lake, with her infected hand wrapped in white reed fiber. Haru apologized for drawing her into his acre on the second day, and for every danger after it. Mio told him the apology was insulting. She had chosen each step, including the one that nearly killed her. Haru tried to explain that losing her frightened him more than the core countdown. The words came out rough and incomplete. Mio watched him twist his father's sickle between his hands. She took it away before he cut himself on the blade. She said she loved him, but she would not become another person he protected by refusing to trust. Haru answered that he loved her too. They sat together until the red storm passed. In the morning, they returned to work. The evidence Senna carried allowed Terra Zero to classify Reiga's final order as a contract violation. The system unlocked withdrawal rights for every Black Harvest owner. Reiga responded by sealing the domain physically. He no longer relied on legal ownership. The chrono root had grown large enough to hold heartstones through force. The countdown reached 40 days. Mio, Dr. Kuramori, and Terra Zero completed their analysis of Pulse of the Age. The ability had never been intended for farming. Before the collapse, Project Terra's creators needed to test possible paths for restoring Earth's biosphere. Real experiments would take centuries. They designed an emergency simulation module that could run living ecosystems through accelerated ages inside a pocket space. The module was supposed to record successful patterns and then dissolve into the planetary core. Haru's mother's seed had carried an old Terra research marker. When he planted it in an acre with a life index of 0, the system recognized the conditions of the abandoned simulation program and activated Pulse of the Age. The power had not chosen Haru because of destiny. A dead acre, an engineered seed, and an unfinished emergency protocol had aligned by chance. The millions of years inside his farm now contained what Terra Zero lacked: real records of life, adapting to ruined soil, unstable water, extreme heat, toxins, and repeated collapse. If Haru returned the complete chrono root and Moku's surviving memory to the core, Terra Zero could apply those patterns to the physical Earth. Natural restoration would still take years, but the planet would stop moving toward permanent sterility. The transfer would destroy Pulse of the Age. It would also require the stolen fragment inside Reiga's domain. The root had divided, and the core would reject an incomplete pattern. Reiga sent a public message before Haru could form a plan. He offered to restore the planet after every remaining acre joined Black Harvest. One authority would decide which ecosystems and people received energy during recovery. The message included images of his domain. Crops grew, reservoirs were full, families ate regular meals under artificial sunlight. Many people still considered the offer. Haru did not answer with a speech. He opened Sprout's network records. Every transfer, shortage, failed vote, repair, and shared harvest became public. Resonance was slower than Reiga's command. It contained arguments and mistakes. It also allowed every owner to leave. Yui sent a global consent request. She asked owners to lend a fraction of their heart energy for one final attempt to enter the planetary core. The request showed the exact risk. If the plan failed, participating acres could collapse early. For 12 hours, the response remained below 10%. Then the elderly seedkeeper joined. The water owners followed. Independent guilds connected their relay acres. Former Black Harvest members added the lands Rega had drained. The network passed 1 million, then 100 million. Participation never became universal, and resonance did not depend on unanimity. It needed enough diversity and energy to keep the route open. Terra Zero created a core gate inside Haru's acre. Only the two owners carrying chrono root fragments could enter the central layer. The system would protect their bodies from accelerated time while they remained within the gate. Anyone else would age with the environment and die. Kaito objected until Terra Zero showed the physical limit. Toma could build supports outside. Mio could send archive calculations through resonance. Yui could maintain the owner network. Senna could guide the withdrawal of captured hearts. Moku could link memory through Haru's anchor. Haru had to face Rega inside alone. He spent the final night repairing the acre. He cleared fallen branches from the wilderness paths. He rebuilt a small section of channel with Toma. He harvested enough sunfruit seed for the public vault. At the lake, Moku transferred copies of surviving memories into Mio's archive, though the damaged records came in fragments. Yui found Haru near the original Heartstone. She gave him the green scarf that had belonged to their mother. He tied it around his injured shoulder, where the Leviathan's tooth had left a permanent weakness. Yui told him to return it. Haru promised. 1 minute before midnight, Terra Zero issued a single-cycle authorization. The planetary quarantine lifted around Haru's acre and would return as soon as the simulation ended. The final activation was permitted to complete the ecological record before the chrono root entered the core. At midnight, the last acceleration began. He stood outside the closed door and watched the timer reach 0. For the final time, 10,000 years passed through his farm. Haru opened the door at dawn. The acre had become an old forest under a clear sky. The sunfruit line was gone. Ironwood arches lay beneath flowering vines. The lake had divided into 3 pools, connected by narrow streams. Small animals watched him from branches and did not flee. Moku said the ecosystem knew an ending was near. Haru asked how plants could know such a thing. Moku touched the soil and answered that everything knew when a long pattern changed. They walked to the central hill. The original water channels remained beneath layers of root and clay. Haru found the place where he had planted his mother's second seed. A plain tree grew there now. It carried small bitter fruit with little nutritional value. He took 1 seed from it. The system gate opened above the Heartstone. Beyond it waited a landscape of white roots suspended in darkness. Billions of lights burned along them, each connected to a personal acre. Red fractures moved between the lights. Raiga entered from the opposite side, wearing his black coat. The cracks on his right arm had spread across his chest and neck. Behind him, the stolen chrono root formed a crown of dark branches. Terra Zero announced the conditions. Inside the core layer, environmental time would shift as the damaged simulation systems discharged. The field would protect each owner's body and every item carried through the gate at the moment of entry. Anything created, detached, grown, or summoned inside the core would age with the environment. The complete chrono root had to reach the central seed before the countdown ended. A white seed of light floated several kilometers away. Rega moved first. He drove his cracked hand into a root carrying hundreds of captured heartstones. Energy flooded his body. A black forest rose from the core surface and spread toward the central seed. Haru planted his father's sickle into the white ground and opened resonance. Heat from Kaito entered the blade. Structural patterns from Toma shaped the soil beneath Haru's feet. Mio's archive marked the Black Forest's growth paths. Senna sent the locations of captured hearts hidden among Rega's roots. Moku settled into Haru's awareness, like a second pulse. Haru ran. The first age struck before he reached the forest. Rain fell for what the environment experienced as 500 years. Rhaega's trees grew into a wall. Haru's path eroded into a canyon. His protected body remained young, but water pressure tore at his clothes and rolled him across the ground. He used Kaito's heat to turn the water ahead into rising mist. The thermal current did not stop the flood. It created a lower pressure channel that pulled him forward. Toma shaped temporary stone ridges beneath the current. Each ridge lasted decades before erosion broke it, but Haru needed only seconds of personal time to cross. Rhaega waited inside the forest. A root spear struck Haru's side. The green scarf softened the cut, but could not stop it. Haru severed the spear. The piece rooted where it fell and grew into a tree that attacked him from behind. Every wound he made became another organism under Rhaega's control. Haru stopped cutting. He let the next root wrap around his wrist. The growth lens revealed energy flowing through it toward Rhaega. Haru sent information, rather than power, back along the resonance connection. Mio flooded the root with incompatible genetic patterns drawn from desert moss, deep lake algae, iron fungus, the sunfruit virus, and white toxin reeds. Rhaega's growth system tried to express all of them at once. The root swelled into malformed branches and released Haru. Rhaega cut the infected section from his network before it spread. He said Haru had learned to contaminate instead of create. Haru answered that Rhaega called every difference contamination. The second age began. Rain stopped. Heat rose. The Black Forest dried over 2,000 environmental years. Rhaega absorbed moisture from his own trees before they died and formed a moving shell of polished wood around his body. Haru's temporary ridges cracked into dust. The white ground became a desert. Kaito sent more heat, but Haru rejected it. Adding energy would strengthen the drought. He asked the cold seed vault to receive heat instead. Through resonance, thousands of storage acres drew warmth away in measured amounts. Frost formed briefly under Haru's feet. He condensed a narrow path of water from the core air and followed it toward the central seed. Rhaega overtook him inside the wooden shell. A heavy branch struck Haru's injured shoulder. Bone shifted. His left arm went numb. Rhaega attacked again before he could stand. Haru rolled under the blow, caught the branch with the sickle, and used Toma's structural pattern to grow a ceramic brace around it. The brace lasted only a few accelerated years. It was enough to redirect the strike into the desert floor. The impact opened a fracture. Red energy surged out. Rhaega absorbed it and grew larger. The cracks across his skin widened, but his expression remained controlled. Haru realized Rhaega was not avoiding temporal debt. He was taking it into his own body and feeding the damage to captured heartstones. Every time the core hurt him, someone else's Acre paid the cost. Sena identified the nearest captive relay beneath the desert. Haru drove his sickle into the ground. Yui sent a consent request through the blade. The trapped owner accepted. Rhaega's wooden shell lost an entire layer. He struck Haru in the chest and sent him sliding toward the red fracture. Haru stopped, with one hand on the edge. Energy below moved like a storm filled with pieces of broken landscapes. Rhaega stepped on his fingers. He told Haru that consent was a luxury granted by people who already had enough. The owners in his domain had chosen food over uncertainty. Haru saw the dark contract line running through Rhaega's boot. He hooked the green scarf around it and pulled. The fabric tore. The line lifted long enough for Yui to reach another captured heart. That owner withdrew. Rhaega's leg armor collapsed. Haru dragged himself away from the fracture. The third age drowned the desert beneath an ocean. Water arrived from every direction. Rhaega expanded his wooden shell into a floating fortress. Haru had no structure large enough to survive. Toma sent an iron forest pattern. But any full vessel would take too long to grow and would age into rot before the ocean phase ended. Moku offered a lineage from the Acre's ancient blind larvae. Their descendants had once developed transparent bones and pressure-resistant bodies. Haru used the chrono root to express the pattern through his clothes and the ceramic brace. A thin, living membrane formed around him. It held air and adjusted pressure as the water deepened. The adaptation cost energy. Red fractures widened across Pulse of the Age. Haru swam beneath Rega's fortress. The growth lens showed hundreds of roots, descending like anchor chains. Captured hearts were embedded inside them. He could not free them one at a time before the core failed. He asked Yui to connect to all of them. She said the strain could destroy her heartstone. Haru merely refused. He felt her anger through resonance before he spoke. She reminded him that this was her choice and asked for a path. Haru looked at the fortress roots. They shared energy through the same hierarchy as the root Leviathan. 3 exchange nodes distributed Riga's control. The pattern had appeared on his acre years earlier because dominant systems often solved problems the same way. He marked the nodes for Mio. Kaito sent focused heat into the first. The ocean boiled around it. Rega redirected cold water from the depths, but the thermal shock cracked the wooden armor. Toma sent a resonant structural pulse into the second. Ironwood fibers aligned, stiffened, and became too brittle to flex with the waves. The node snapped under the fortress's weight. The third node sealed itself in iron-rich resin. Haru smiled despite the blood in his mouth. The Leviathan had used the same defense. Sena released toxin reed compounds through the connected captive roots. The resin softened as white fibers absorbed its minerals. Moku added dormant gray fungus memory. The node hardened in patches, softened in others, and tore itself apart under uneven pressure. The fortress split. Yui sent the consent request through all exposed connections. Green light spread under the ocean. Thousands of owners withdrew from Rega at once. Their heartstones entered resonance in local clusters, sharing the strain instead of placing all of it on Yui. Raiga fell through the collapsing fortress toward Haru. He caught Haru by the throat. Devourer of Fertility pulled at Pulse of the Age. Haru felt the complete chrono root trying to join inside Rega instead of the central seed. Moku cried out as memories vanished from Haru's awareness. Haru drove the bitter seed from the last morning into a crack on Rega's arm. The seed was a living descendant of the engineered tree, shaped by millions of years inside Haru's ecosystem. The seed recognized the old Terra marker in both root fragments and began linking them. Rega tried to absorb it. The seed germinated inside the energy flow. The fourth age began. The ocean floor rose into mountains. Water drained through new valleys. The seed between them grew through 10,000 environmental years in seconds. Its roots entered Haru's pulse and Rega's graft. Its branches drew from neither owner alone. Every mutation carried patterns from Resonance, Archive, Moku, and the captured domain. Rega tore at the trunk. Each broken branch divided and rejoined elsewhere. He increased Devourer of Fertility until the dark cracks covered his face. The tree fed him energy, but it also carried every relationship that energy required. Water demanded channels. Roots demanded fungi. Fungi demanded dead matter. Flowers demanded insects. Predators demanded prey. Millions of dependencies entered an ability built to reduce everything to one resource. Rega's domain could not sort them. Black trees erupted across the new mountains, each consuming the next. Rivers reversed. Parasites attacked their hosts and died with them. The remaining captured hearts rejected the unstable network and moved into resonance. Rega's power collapsed inward. The central seed of light stood on the next ridge. Haru caught the living bridge between himself and Rega. The complete chrono root came free, wrapped around the bitter tree's trunk. Rega fell toward a valley opening beneath them. Haru caught his wrist with his one working arm. The extra weight pulled Haru to the edge. Rega looked up, shocked less by defeat than by the hand holding him. Haru could have let go. The core would register Rega's death as the end of the hostile graft. The route to the seed would become easier. Instead, Haru anchored the sickle into the mountain and called Toma. An ironwood cable grew around the handle. Kaito hardened it with heat. Owners across resonance shared the load in tiny fractions. Haru pulled Rega onto the ridge. Saving Rega erased none of his crimes. Haru still refused to build the restored world on an execution he could prevent. The final age began. Mountains weathered into hills. The central seed flickered. Terra Zero announced 30 seconds of protected personal time before core failure. Rega could barely stand. Devourer had burned the nerves in his right side. He told Haru the network would eventually choose leaders, punish dissent, and become another Black Harvest. Haru lifted the complete chrono route. He said that might happen. Then people would have to stop it again. A living system did not become safe forever because one battle ended. He ran toward the seed. The ground aged beneath every step. Grass became forest. Forest became peat. Peat became stone. The ironwood cable snapped. The ceramic brace on Haru's shoulder turned to powder. His protected body did not age, but accumulated injuries dragged him down. Mio guided him around the last red fracture. Yui stabilized the route. Kaito poured the remaining heat from his acre into the fading seed. Toma held the gate structure together, as its materials passed through centuries. Senna completed the last captive transfers. Moku opened every surviving memory. Haru reached the central seed with 4 seconds left. He pressed the chrono root into the light. Pulse of the age vanished from his body. The core exploded into green. Haru woke beside his own heartstone. Mio was holding pressure against the wound in his side. Yui lay on the other side of the gate, with Dr. Kuramori monitoring her pulse. Kaito had burns across both hands. Toma sat against a broken ironwood support, laughing because the structure had failed 1 second after it no longer mattered. Moku rested on Haru's chest. One new leaf had opened on its head. The red sky was gone. Terra Zero spoke across every acre. Temporal debt had stabilized. Pocket spaces would remain active, but no accelerated simulation could operate again. The planetary restoration program had begun using the complete ecological record. Outside, rain fell on 7th node. It was not water leaking from a broken atmospheric processor. Clouds had formed over the surface and crossed the city wall. People climbed from shelters to stand beneath them. Haru reached his acre door that evening. He hesitated before opening it. Part of him expected another 10,000 years to have rewritten everything. The forest looked exactly as it had that morning. A drop of water still hung from the same leaf near the entrance. Small animals remained in the branches. The bitter tree stood on the hill. The system timer was gone. Haru walked to the lake and waited for the world to change. Ripples moved with the wind. A beetle crossed a stone. Shadows lengthened 1 minute at a time. His first response was irritation. He saw a damaged reed and knew it would take weeks to replace itself. A bare patch of soil might need a full season. The tree on the hill would not become a forest by morning. Mio found him measuring a new shoot with the growth lens. She took the lens away and told him to look at it tomorrow. Rega survived. Terra Zero removed his control permissions after confirming the contract violations. The owners in Resonance voted to place him under supervised restoration work, rather than return him to a prison block that could not contain his remaining ability. His personal acre had been reduced to exhausted soil. For 7 years, he would rebuild lands damaged by Black Harvest, while every transfer remained public. Senna volunteered to oversee the toxin cleanup. She did not ask Haru to trust her. She accepted investigation for every invasion she had led, and testified for the owners who had lost their acres. Sprout changed as well. Yui refused the title of central operator. Resonance divided into regional networks, with elected relays and automatic withdrawal rights. No single Heartstone, including hers, could hold the entire system again. In 2164, Haru and Mio traveled between city nodes, teaching owners how to build stable ecosystems without acceleration. Haru's advice frustrated people. He asked them to observe soil for weeks before changing it. He recommended several modest species instead of one miraculous crop. He made farmers test water twice and keep records of failures. Mio created the open atlas of new species from Archive and Moku's surviving memories. Missing sections remained marked instead of being reconstructed with guesses. She said an honest gap was more useful than a beautiful lie. Yui learned to manage resonance without carrying every connection through her body. She became the architect of local exchange clusters. Her acre grew into a meadow fed by small voluntary contributions from thousands of lands. She planted no central crop. Toma built the first surface irrigation system using ironwood around ceramic cores. Kaito supplied heat for firing and complained that the pipes received more public praise than his territorial victories. By 2165, Sprout became the Epoch Cooperative. It had rules Haru disliked, meetings Kaito avoided, and arguments that lasted past midnight. Owners could leave. That fact mattered more than efficiency. Haru and Mio married in 2166 inside the restored Acre. They exchanged seeds instead of rings. Kaito stood beside Haru in formal clothes he hated. Yui stood beside Mio, wearing their mother's green scarf, which Haru had returned after the core battle, with one end torn and stained. In 2167, Mio gave birth to a daughter. They named her Nanami. Haru approached fatherhood as though it were another unstable ecosystem. He measured room temperature too often. He recorded feeding times to the second. He woke whenever Nanami moved in her sleep. Mio deleted half his monitoring alerts. As Nanami grew, Haru learned that attention did not require control. He could make the room safe and still allow her to fall while learning to walk. He could answer questions without choosing what she would become. In 2168, natural food from restored farms supplied 3 city regions. Moku became keeper of the first public living seed vault. Its body grew slowly now. Each spring added a ring visible along its wooden wrists. In 2169, survey teams found soil outside the pocket acres that could support plants without system energy. The first test field covered less land than Haru's original acre. People guarded it from wind, birds, and their own impatience. Haru refused an invitation to lead the planetary council. He accepted a position teaching field restoration and returned home before dinner. In 2170, the first open settlement began construction on the surface. Reiga completed the compulsory stage of his restoration work. He and Haru met beside a river that had once been a drainage trench. Reiga had lost most movement in his cracked right hand. He said resonance had become slower and more political every year. Haru agreed. Reiga asked whether that disappointed him. Haru looked at owners arguing over a bridge design, while workers continued building the supports they had already approved. He said slow decisions were inconvenient. They were still decisions people could challenge. Their relationship never became friendship. Reiga returned to the land assigned to him and continued working under public oversight. In 2171, Haru was 29. He lived with Mio and 4-year-old Nanami near the restored 7th node. His acre remained 1 acre. The forest no longer transformed overnight. Some species had died during ordinary winters. Others had spread farther than he planned. Haru handled each problem with tools, records, and time. One spring morning, Nanami carried the seed Haru had taken from the bitter tree on the last morning of acceleration. Mio had preserved it in archive storage for years. Tests showed that its unstable Terra marker was gone. It was now an ordinary seed from an unusual tree. They planted it on the surface outside the old city wall. Nanami pushed soil over it with both hands. She asked when it would become as tall as the trees in Haru's acre. Haru told her it would take many years. She considered this, then asked whether he could make it faster. He said he could water it, protect its roots, and make sure the soil stayed healthy. The rest belonged to the tree. Nanami poured too much water into the hole. Mud covered her shoes. Mio laughed and handed Haru the empty container. A light rain began over the field. Haru placed a simple wooden marker beside the seed. He checked that it stood straight, then followed Mio and Nanami toward home. Behind them, beneath a few centimeters of dark soil, the seed opened at its own pace.